Yeah, I want to continue on that thread, and I'll open this up for anybody. Just recognizing that the state board, the charter board, the council, these are like policy boards. What recommendations might you have for any of us for ways that we can strengthen or build on these connections that have proved so vital between families and the school? So I'm not going to call on anyone, but I will. Maybe we could just popcorn it out naturally. But like, what policy recommendations might you give us or others to strengthen these family and school connections?
And it could be resources too. If there are resources you think would help you or your school.
I'll go.
Go ahead. I almost did.
Oh, Miss Bryant, go ahead. I saw your hand.
Oh, you can go first.
So one of the things that I heard Miss Gentry say that I think is really powerful that I want to come back to is this idea of, if we're thinking about policy, one of the things that this pandemic has brought out to the forefront that many of us knew all along, but it's really been at the kind of the forefront of our discussions about the impact on education, is the digital divide between more affluent families and families that are less affluent. And as I think about, in education, we always talk about we don't have money for this, we don't have money for this, but it's amazing how we found all this money to get devices for students. So we fund what we value. And in this pandemic, I think we valued getting kids connected virtually. And when I think about policies, I think as detrimental as this pandemic can be, and as it may be, one of the silver linings of all of this is the fact that we have students who are now more technologically advanced in communities like mine in historic Anacostia that have been pretty marginalized and kept out of some of the advancements in technology because of financial reasons. So I would actually love to see, as a policy, support for students and families on technology. There's been a lot of talk about STEM and STEM labs and STEM working, but the reality is that access to technology is actually access to the jobs of the future. And I think that if we could work with parents and students to somehow build on this momentum that we've got through the pandemic and through this virtual learning experience, and to really make some of these technology requirements part of our curriculum, giving kids access to them, especially in communities like mine, where they may not have access to this technology at home, but making sure that we are properly funded to give access to these technological components, and that we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? It's not like, do you want a librarian or do you want a tech person? It doesn't have to be either or, it can be both and. Because I think that when we think about how easy it was for some families to pivot to virtual learning and how challenging it was for others, I think that we would be remiss if we didn't use this opportunity to realize that the training and the policy that needs to come into the school building or into the curriculum would involve a heavy-handed digital component so that we can have students and families like the ones that I serve have access to the jobs and to the opportunities of the future.
That is so powerful. And I see so many people head nodding. Principal Morales, I don't mean to cut you off, but I would just even extend what you're saying, Principal Rittersberger, that not even just providing the technology, but to Ms. Gentry's earlier points, the training and the supports that allow families to leverage that technology in a very meaningful way.
Yeah, can I just add one thing? I'll be super quick, and I know that's not my default, so I'm gonna do it. One of the things, I was in a meeting today, we're building a rec center on the space of Ketchum Elementary School. One of the things I've been really adamant about to that point is creating a workplace development center within the rec center. We think of rec centers as fun and safe spaces for students to go to so that they're, off the streets and that they have a safe place to play. But I really look at this project as a way for us to invest in the greater Anacostia community. And I think that exactly what you talked about, Zach, the classes for parents and grandparents on technology is one of the things that can be taught within a center, within our DPR centers, within our school-based centers. We can partner with community organizations. I think that we have to grasp this opportunity where people are talking about and engaging with tech every day, whether we want to or not, to do training for our families, for our students, for our seniors, to give them additional access.
Yeah. Can I go now, Zach? I was going to say, like, adding on to what Principal Riddlespiger said, allocating funds for family engagement. So we do receive Title I funding, but that's just a small pot of money, right? And we have a parent engagement room, but I can't fund it. Like, I don't have computers for our families to use or to train on. And I think also just like allocating the funds for the technology piece for families and students, but also for teachers and paraprofessionals, right? Like our paraprofessionals have had to step in and basically take over a class or a small group of students, knowing that, you know, they're underpaid, and they still have to pay for internet. They have to pay for their devices if we couldn't get them a device. So I think it's like there should be a pot of money or budgeted for technology use. You know, and I don't know if policy can work on this or not, but um, is there a discount rate for educators? Do students that go to a DC public school or charter school have free access to internet? Because that was a hit that we took on as well. Um, Many of our paraprofessionals could not have unlimited data use at home, and so it was finding ways to, you know, get them the money, or either like paying half or finding a way for them to do it as well. So it's the allocation of the money and the resources. If we could have a little bit more of that we could control, that would be, you know, that would be in our benefit.
Ms. Bryan, I want to come to you. I do have a quick follow-up question, and Principal Morales, maybe you could put it in the chat. You talked about not having like an extensive amount of Title I funds for like family engagement. Like, can you just give a sense of what might be a good figure versus what is allotted? And maybe we don't have to go too in the weeds there.
I mean, you know, when we look at what technology costs and resources, you know, for example, and this is public knowledge, so I don't have anything to hide, but for Title I money, we got about $3,000. I mean, that's enough to maybe set up one or two computers in our parent room. But then it's everything else that comes with it, the supplies and the materials. So we are allotted some money, but it's just not enough, you know, and it's not cutting it. And then that money then goes to other, for example, I think Miss Gentry said it earlier today, that they got supplies for their kids, you know, at the beginning of the year. So that's what we use that money for, because to continue the learning at home with the families, we got them notebooks and scissors and glue and all kinds of sorts of things so that they didn't have to go out and purchase it. But I mean, it only took us so far, right? So I think just allocating money in terms of like what is the need of the school, um, you know, but then that becomes a little bit tricky. Like, how do you determine the needs of the school? And especially in a school like mine, that when you look at the numbers, we are 64% Latino. We are Title I school, but we also have many affluent families, and so it becomes it becomes tricky to try to like figure out who needs what.
That's very helpful. Ms. Bryant.
Yeah.
So what recommendations or for policies, resources might you have for helping schools and families forge stronger relationships?
So as a former DCPS graduate, I would just say that, yes, I totally agree. I'm a Water girl. So one thing I did notice is there is a divide in this city, whether anyone wants to, talk about it or not. And so I think with this pandemic, it really has burst the doors wide open into the disconnect of what we received in our schools. I'm a very vocal parent who, touch bases with the council or anyone as to explain my concern, because education is important. Children only get one childhood, and I'm a huge advocate on that. But for me, I would just first like to say that any elected official in the city needs to listen, because what I noticed the disconnect from a parent's perspective is that people want to just initiate things without listening to the actual people involved in the process. And in this pandemic, there are two people really involved with our child right now, which is us as a parent and the teachers. And right now, for me, I would like for many of our people who are leading to make those decisions by listening to us first. Funding is huge because, like, I come from a city where I was a side of the city where I was born and raised, where we did not have, good running water, good working lights. We had to have torn out school books with paper. So I see my kid going to a school in Ward 2. It's a totally different thing. I have nieces, in Ward 7 and 8 and Ward 5. And there is a disconnect when it comes to funding, access, strategizing when it comes to the people who need it. And so I want to make sure that we are heard and we are accounting for, and we have access to the same things that people west of the river have, as well as people east of the river. And so for me growing up, I'm almost 35, and that's still the ongoing thing that the challenge we're facing today. And so I just want policies to be made that implement people who has gone unheard for years. And so that's where my frustration comes in. And I hope that leaders can make those right decisions to do the right things.
Yeah, I think you spoke a million words. Listening and engaging proactively is so very important, and helps build the trust that we've already talked about is so critical in these connections between families and the school. Ms. Gentry, thanks for your comment. Like, what recommendations would you have for policies or resources?
I think that I'm looking for our policymakers to address the more resources and more funds for mental health and trauma. Mental health supports is very important right now. We have a lot of children, well, just going through the corona, pandemic. That's been a lot of stress on a lot of people. Crime has went up. People are just, people have lost a lot of people. Death is, our children are dealing with death. And the people that train them, the people that instruct our children, they need to know how to work with our children. And so I would like to see funds allocated for them to have professional training for dealing with children with mental health supports and that have mental health problems, and working more with children. I know we have behavioral people in the school, but then the child doesn't stay with the behavioral person all day. The child goes to an instructor, and that instructor also needs to know how to work with our children. And so I would like to see more money put in for their training also, because it's about the whole picture, the whole puzzle. We can't take pieces of the puzzle out. We have to have the whole puzzle or it won't come together.
Totally. Ms. Bryant, go for it.
Yes, I would like to piggyback. I meant to talk about the mental health part. I would like to see in this pandemic and this virtual learning, they have to address the mental health, not just for kids as well, but the parents. And me being in the community a lot of parents are breaking down because they feel like they cannot do things right now, or just about what's going on, losing their jobs, their sense of failure. So that's something I will hope that they can immediately touch bases on in a way that they can reach each parent in a mental health aspect, because it's definitely needed. And a lot of people go silent and don't want to talk about it or talk to a friend. But that's something we need to start talking about, because it truly affects the child as well.
Without a doubt. When you were saying that, Ms. Gentry, I believe everybody was shaking their head. Just as a point of reference, I know, and not to get political, but I know in the last council budget cycle, and this is just a fact, that the council ultimately decided to cut community-based mental health services. And so by no means are we asking parents to both do a full-time job or whatever they do professionally and support their children and be on the front lines of politics to advocate for these things. But as much as parents like yourselves can join forces to raise the need for these services, the better, because I fully agree, and I think by the head nods we all can agree, Ms. Gentry, that mental health services are critical, especially during a pandemic, for educators, for parents, and certainly for our young people who are going through so much. I'm going to turn it over to Emily, but thank you all for such rich recommendations.